And welcome, Freedom Warriors, to Essential Talks podcast, where you stay for the conversation and you leave empowered. This is episode number 7, and we are going to be talking about COVID, of course, CoFlu, other people like to call it, censorship, and staying sane in an insane world. These are going to be some of the topics we're talking about. Our guest is Meagan Baldini, and I'm your host, Jamie Russo, and the lovely Jessica. So, how about you tell us a little bit about your background there, Meagan? I see that you have been into data collecting, kind of what got you into that, and analyzing the data to have all these magnificent numbers that you come up with.
For AnonBC, yeah. So my actual day job is a construction project manager, but I spent about 7 years doing estimating for building different buildings or renovations, things like that. So I'm quite methodical in the way that my brain processes information. I'm looking at things from a resource management type of style. You know, if you have X amount of labor, you need to, get something done in this amount of time. How are you going to do that most efficiently? So that's like how my brain automatically works with my day job. And when COVID started happening, I sort of just automatically was like looking at things with the same mindset. Like if I was managing this project or building this thing or instructing trades to do this thing, how would I handle it? And as I started talking about COVID online, looking at it closer, all the public data just wasn't making sense or aligning with the fear tactics that they messaging from, politicians and the news alike were sharing online. So it really sort of started with just like my brain being like, why are they doing things like this? Like, that doesn't seem efficient, right? Like, why would they spend this money over here? That doesn't seem efficient. Why would you go and do something for a group over here that doesn't even help the people that are harmed, right? It's like a lot of the decisions just weren't economically sound decisions from our government, and that's why I was sort of approaching it from that sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of us, it never made sense from the beginning. It quickly kind of fell apart, and yeah, it left us all wondering, of course. And now we're at this point, and most of us are just shaking our heads because we're in disbelief of, how people are just lining up for the jab here, and all this data that some of us are processing has always baffled me, because I thought, well, if you have a grade 6 math education, you should be able to do some of the simple data. So, can you share some of your findings that you have found? And
For sure. I think it's not necessarily a matter of it being difficult math or difficult data to analyze in general. I think it's just the tactics and the method and speed that it's hitting the population without proper time to understand, discern, and process, right? So the data that we get hit with on a regular basis, whether it's from the government, BC, CDC, it's always the same, but every week, depending on what goal they're pushing or what thing they're trying to incentivize or decentivize, they will manipulate a certain area of data to showcase that info in a different way that's more beneficial to whatever goal they're trying to achieve. So if you're not keeping up with that and going, wait, last week you were giving me this number based off of this, and you haven't, accounted for the testing increase, and now you're telling me about this number over here, and you have accounted for a testing increase, and you're now comparing something that's not apples to apples, the average person, as they take in this info every day, isn't going to go, double check, look at the fine print, read the asterisk saying, please note, we're missing XYZ at the bottom, right? So it's not that it's difficult, it's just it's a lot to keep up with. And, a fair example, simple example is when they started talking about the unvaccinated people in the hospitals, right? Most people don't understand the definitions that they currently have for people when it comes to the unvaccinated, sorry, I'm not supposed to say it, the injected, uninjected, and partially injected, being that if you are, non-GMO, that, doesn't actually mean you haven't been injected. It just means it could have been within the last 21 days. So when the news is out there saying, oh my God, all these people are in the hospital, it's like, well, maybe maybe 80% of them just got injected in the last 3 weeks, you know, maybe 50% of them just got injected in the last 3 weeks. We won't know that unless we get an actual response with our Freedom of Information Act that we submitted to the government to break out that info, because other provinces throughout the country are providing that info. Other provinces actually have 4 categories. Other ones have 3 categories. So depending on where you are, those types of definitions change, and then that changes how you analyze the numbers, right? And if you're not keeping up with the language change, then that's an easy way to fall prey to just believing these numbers that they go out there and say these, you know, oh my goodness, you need to go get injected ASAP because look at everything that's happening. It's like, wait, what does this actually mean, right? And most people don't read the reports because they're boring, they're fine print, and who cares? Like typically, who would care, right? Why do I care to go read these reports? Well, because I'm being lied to, right? And no one else, not no one, but a lot of people aren't going to do this, you know, extra step. But I think that's the problem, is most people just can't keep up, and you can't fault them. It's like people aren't data analysts. They're not out here, you know, thinking that they need to wake up every day and audit their government for, you know, trying to pull the wool over them. So it's not a simple reason as to how we even got here with this data. It's just like the general public, how do we expect them to keep up, you know?
Yeah, and I think they did a lot of that by design as well. When you do look at how the data is actually coming out, I like to call it word sorcery. So they give you a word context that literally takes you by the hand and leads you off the trail. So when they talk about how many people have been fully injected, they'll use terminology like 80% of the injected population, or what do they call it? The eligible population. Oh. So then it's like, well, what is the eligible? You know, if it's 70% has it and 60% of the population is eligible, then that's only 42%. And then with it being an experiment, right, you're looking at about 30 to 35% placebo. Now you're down to about 30%, right? So it's a lot of word sorcery. They do throw a lot of confusion in there, so it's hard for people to keep up. And I believe that's by design, so you're not looking at it. And then they changed the collection when they put it out in the media. Started out with the deaths, then the cases, and then the percentage of who's been injected.
Yeah, so, and the variants, things like that as well, right? So
I just had a quick question too. When did you guys actually submit the Freedom of Information request?
I know that a few people that I talked to had about 4 weeks ago. One of my close friends, partners, basically we work together on a lot of things. They had submitted it on behalf, and they were going to share it with myself as well when they got it. I heard somebody else got an answer, but I haven't seen it officially, so that's yet to be seen. But
well, that's super exciting.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is like, you know, even in these examples where you think you might checkmate the government, like they have the power to then change the rules around that information as they provide it to you. And they're, you know, people could argue if it's intentional or not, or they're just, you know, really good at manipulating, right, by accident. But oftentimes it's like they'll come out, you ask something, and they're going to figure out a way to position it back to you in a way that justifies whatever they're doing or throws you off track again, right? So for example, one of them being like the cases for children, right? And then they go and they turn it into a per 100,000 stat, and then they try and compare it to something else, and then they'll bring the age group in with like the elderly, and then try and talk about a general stat and almost apply it to the wrong demographic. And it's like, wait, you need to adjust for the age. Like, don't go out here including like people who are dying 80, 85, 90 years old, right? And there's little bits of fine print where sometimes they say, you know, like they're not necessarily listing all people over a certain age, or, you know, maybe they're accounting for people accidentally twice, and so they're always updating their reports. So it's like you never really know what they're giving you and how long that information is going to be valid until they come back and say, oh, we didn't mean it like that, or we had to update our report, or we had to do this, right? So that's where we always have to kind of take it for face value and sort of just keep it very simple, because the more we make it complex, the more we get off track, right? Because they turn it around and try and make you seem like you're not smart enough to make reasonable, pragmatic, critical thinking decisions, right? And for what's best for you based on this information. And if they can keep coming back here and making it seem complicated so you stay in fear and stay confused, then that's what they're going to try and do, right? And when the general public is unfortunately, stressed, tired, anxious, fearful, every other emotion in between, like they're just sitting there waiting to be exploited, right? So that's why, people like us are so important.
Yes. Well, I find it really interesting to see how different people's backgrounds will, their skills will come through in seeing through this. So, for example, like I went to school for public relations. And so statistic manipulation, word manipulation, that's the name of the game. And so when this all started coming out, it was the emotional wording that was used in certain things. I was like, this is meant to make you feel a certain way. They wouldn't use triggering kind of language like that to be like for no reason. And then exactly what you were experiencing, the same thing with statistics. You're looking at this and you're like, well, this is inconsistent. Like this is compared against this, but then it's like juxtapositioned against other things so that you make it think it's like that, but it's not. And it's just like, it's exactly what Jamie was saying, like the wizardry that's going on behind this, just to try to, because people have been so conditioned to just read headlines and just to absorb the basics, because we're so inundated with so many other things that trying to become fully involved and immersed in multiple things is it would almost make you insane. And so to try to get the summary of everything, that's where you're going to get lost. Is the summary is just right now the government's narrative. If you spend the time though to go a little bit deeper, it's staggering what you find.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up again. We can bring up 1,000 examples, but one thing that I noticed in the most recent press briefing with my least favorite person who lives rent-free in my brain, Bonnie Henry, her last press briefing, you watch the language she uses around children. It's very interesting because you'll see her kind of dance, and you'll see when she's really struggling to figure out what to say, in the sense of like she knows she's not buying what she's selling. Like you can feel it in her energy, and you watch her speak. And then when she talks about testing or new testing, she gets really excited because that must be something she's like super into, which is like good for you, Bonnie. But when she was talking about children, she says this thing, children of this school age. It's like, okay, just say like 5 to 11, Bonnie. She's like, of school age, or of young children, right? It's those little things, by saying it like of a child's school age, that is meant to grab your emotions. Most people would say, well, what's the difference between saying a 7-year-old? A lot, when people hear the word school child, they think of somebody more vulnerable. You hear a 7-year-old, you're like, okay, that's a number, it's a child, right? There's little ways like that actually, we're studied on a regular basis for what words impact us. So it's naive to think that they don't have a very detailed book of like, what word can I use to trigger people the most, right? The data from Instagram, Facebook, they collect this. They know what functions, right? And in terms of our society right now, and in general, what's going to, cause instigation and get a reaction, and what's going to be like, boring, we don't care, right? So every detail, they will manipulate the words. They don't even want to say they need to say the babies just to get your emotional reaction. You're like, it's crazy.
Yes. I've seen that the whole way through, and in the beginning we had the death count, so we had the countdown, and it was death. Now the numbers, I believe, are so low that they've switched that over to related deaths. So the CoFlu related death, and I'm curious of what that actually means, and I'd love to find the definition on it. So if somebody got delayed and they're in stage 4 cancer, and they got delayed an operation and they died of the cancer, then of course the hospital was shut down for the CoFlu, and now they died from COVID related death. So it's kind of interesting, the wordplay and the way they bat around the statistics.
Yeah, well, because somebody could have been brought into the hospital for an unrelated issue, right? Then they get tested for process. They come back positive. They're there for not even that. They happen to be, they're like, okay, shit, now I also have the CoFlu, right? Sucks to suck. You win some, you lose some. And then they go there, they do whatever they needed to. They were there for like a bladder infection. They go home, they're good, right? And then imagine that person died, right? Their bladder infection killed her. There was a girl in North Van that actually happened to. She had an infection in her that was completely misdiagnosed, and they kept focusing on COVID. She went home. She died at 29. I don't know if you heard about that, but that type of concept, right? So that would be like, there's been cases where people die after the fact, but because within a certain amount of days since they were discharged, that gets still put on the coroner report in many cases. So you find a lot of families having to go fight to remove that from the document for their death certificate. And one thing as well, when it comes to the deaths listed on the BC government site, they're still excluding for 2020 their total death count for COVID from their 2020 death stats. So they're keeping that separate still. They're still analyzing that information. But we know the number. We know it's like 2,000 something people in the last 18, 19 months in BC, right? We've got 5.1 million people here. Of those 2,000 people, you've got 83% who are over the age of 70, 56% who are in long-term care. So by the time you break up that chunk of people, you've got like 345 people left who are under the age of 70. This is as of like the 12th or something, or whatever their last report is. So those numbers change. If by the time listeners listen to this, it might be slightly higher. But, of those 345 people who are under the age of 70, let's talk about those issues, right? Those people are likely to have 2 to 3 comorbidities. They're likely to have existing issues that they've gone to the hospital for unrelated to COVID. So when you really get down to the 345 people, right, it's like the problem is the moral ideological part of this conversation, because people on the empath side or alleged empath side who are very exploited from the empathy side of this storyline, they hear that and they hear you saying like, so those people don't matter, right? And that's the part that we need to be understanding of, even though it's like, yeah, but it's 345 people, like people die. I'm sorry to break it to you. I don't know if CoFlu just taught you this, but people do die, right? So that, I think, is the biggest problem that we're going to have facing these people as we like wake people up and get them to understand that it's not about not caring about the 345 people under 70 who died, right? It's understanding the cost to help those people. And we should want to do everything we can to help anybody. But when the cost ends up costing more than what it's rewarding us, then that's why we should be having these conversations, right? And when you're not allowed to have those conversations, and that deaths are literally just counting up, like that's where you really see, okay, there's a real big problem here. Because if this was really accidental, the government would come out and really be like, okay, we really have to just say we fucked up and right or wrongs or something. But this is to the point where it's like, when something's dying, it's going to try and do anything it can to stay alive. And we're watching that happen with everything the government does. Every action is like a last stitch effort, right? And so it's that same concept of like, people are just so worried about like getting in trouble, getting all this stuff, when it's really like it's 345 people in our entire province. We need to understand, how do we make people healthier so that 345 people don't die from a virus, right? Maybe we should have that conversation.
What's interesting too is that like, if they knew how many people died from motor vehicle accidents, preventative, not even that it was their own fault, but they were by somebody else hitting them. And it's like, if they want to say things like, well, don't those lives matter? Don't these people's lives matter? It's like, but do you know how many people died from motor vehicle accidents? Don't their lives matter? Like, what are we doing? Why aren't we stopping transit? Why aren't we making people take the bus and putting people on trains, making more train tracks, making sure that we can, put these people together and send them, together. That way they're not off driving on their own, because God, they could die. And it's like, yeah, but how many compared to how many people are driving daily? And so it's like, what's really interesting is when you compare the conditioning that's gone into this to something else like that, they say, well, that's ridiculous. Like, I get in my car every day and I go driving. It's like, exactly. I go outside every day and talk to people, and I'm not getting sick. And it's just like, yeah, but every so often there is going to be somebody. So how can you prevent that? Same thing with road rules. Not looking at your phone while you're driving, being in good health conditions, like all these types of things. And so it's like, how can you avoid this? How can you try to minimize that? It's just like, it's the same thing. It's just that you haven't been conditioned to have that crammed down your throat for 18 months, almost 2 years now. And it's like,
in the midst of a body positivity society where discussing weight is so problematic in general. Like, I remember talking about weight really early on my page before my big account got censored. It was like everybody and their mom was like too scared to talk about COVID early on. And I was like, don't care and talk about it, right? And I would bring up the weight discussions very early on. We got data showing if you were under 70, you had a bad reaction to COVID, there was like literally you could pinpoint the reasons, right? You're either overweight, you might have, an autoimmune disorder, you might have had like lung issues in the past. Like, it's pretty consistent of these types of people who fare, poorly with this illness, if you think it's a real illness. But I don't even argue with people if they buy into believing or not. I'm like, if someone's sick of something, right? So I think when you start to break that down even further and you kind of educate people on like who is getting sick and why, right? And if we really cared about that, let's help everybody, then we need to have that honest conversation, not be worried about being called fat phobic. Like, that's what I got called, right, when I'm talking about these issues. Because apparently caring about somebody overweight enough to tell them the truth is fat phobic. But I care about them enough that their life is on the line, and that's why I rather offend if it's offensive, right? So that's where people don't understand. It's almost like, okay, I'm going to do the nice thing right now that's temporary and easy. Even though I know morally this is the right thing to do, this is what I have to do now. And that's a fair example for everything going on in society, like tenfold in every way, shape, and form. That's how we're behaving, right? So even though we know a morally correct thing to do, people are like, you know what? That's a whole lot of not my problem. I'm going to do this, look like a good person, go about my life and move on, right? And I don't have to think about it. The problem we see now is that, the walls are closing in and now everyone's getting affected, right? So it has to get worse before it gets better. But, we also just have to stop caring about being called some type of name because people are upset over, honesty.
Yeah. Avoiding confrontation pins you into a corner eventually.
Yeah. Well, the thing is it's not even confrontation. That's what's amazing is like these controversial topics are now so controversial that that's automatically assumed to be confrontation. And it's like,
yes,
and we can blame both sides, right? Like, I have conversations with people on our side. I don't even like to say that, but people on our side all the time where I'm just like, no wonder why people think we're crazy. Like I can't even have a conversation with you keeping on track, right? And the people on the other side where it's like, I cannot believe you haven't accidentally like offed yourself with like where your capability is at right now, right? And I look at both sides and like, how are we going to get people to come in the middle on the radical sides and sit down and have a conversation about what's going on, right? Because this is a long-term game, right? And it's going to be all about how we understand human behavior in a radicalized, polarized society. Like, how do you deal with that, right? And that is really discomforting to when you think about what do we do after the CoFlu with the polarized people on either side. Because we can change the people in the middle. We're able to have civil conversations. We're able to sit down, talk about things, and it doesn't need to get, irate or vitriolic towards each other. I have people on the other side I speak to all the time that I'm able to maintain relationships with, but then there's other people who are just, their brain is so fried from it on either side, and they've attached such a personal identity to an outcome that, like, and the real conversation is, what do we do with society after CoFlu?
Yeah, this is true. And further censorship is not going to help us come together. Not having these dialogues is just is a disaster. And so, and you had mentioned before that you had gotten censored too as well. And just kind of, it's without having these dialogues, like basically if two opposing sides can't talk it out, then they're going to duke it out. So it's really, it's going to have that or one way or the other. And so it's just a matter of time. So the longer that we, I guess, of not going to say avoid having these conversations, because like you're not avoiding having this conversation, we're not, obviously, but I mean that's what I think I meant with more so with confrontation, is that some people, they don't want to confront the nastier parts of themselves that they don't want to admit to. They just want to be freely allowed to do whatever they want to, and then reap the rewards of whatever they think they're entitled to, without understanding that there's consequence to every action regardless of what you do. Even living a healthy lifestyle is not going to guarantee you health, but living an unhealthy one is more or less almost going to guarantee you a bad reaction. And so not taking that kind of responsibility and accountability for yourself, and then turning around and pointing fingers at the person who's trying to bring that to light, there's going to be a lot of waking up to do, because the facts don't lie. So at least the government's facts lie.
Exactly. And even if you take their numbers for face value, which we do with the Anon account, it all started where I was like, okay, if you guys know Meg or Meags, whatever you want to call me, I'm outspoken, I'm very blunt. People wish I was more empathetic, even though I have a lot of empathy. People just don't understand it, right? So just because they don't know my type of empathy doesn't mean it's not there, right? So I was recognizing my flaws, let's say, to reaching certain types of individuals that we're going to have to try and reach, right? People always say, if they're not awake now, you'll never get them. I'm like, everybody takes time to get somewhere, right? And to already give up now, I think that's silly, right? I think if it took 18 months to program people this well, it's not going to happen in 2 days that they're just going to wake up. Oh my God, I've seen the light. It's going to take effort, and we're going to have to reverse hit them on a daily of thinking different, right? Planting seeds and going back and watering them. It's not one hit wonder. And again, life's golden again. We have a campaign of war of information to compete against, right? So the only cure to bad speech is better speech, right? So you have to reach the people. We need majority. And if majority is too far gone, then why have you not just already rolled up your sleeve, right? The problem is having this conversation with the censorship, right? Because a lot of these people are this close to being reached. They really are. They've got a lot of ideologies or thought processes and opinions that are anti-government or anti-capitalism or anti, the Western colonialism, right? And they're this close to kind of getting the dots connected for them to be wow, the oppressor that I hate who colonized this country is also the one giving me the cure to the virus. Right? So we have to really put in that effort to reach them. It's just, how do you do it with this level of censorship? And it's, by making the Anon account, I was able to take the irate girl or the intense girl out of the mix of information and present it to people in the middle who are more vanilla, or, Megan's too much to listen to because it's just, her tone of voice or, an immediate bias they might have when they look at me. Right. And it was going really well for 6 days. My account blew up. Right. And I wasn't pushing it as Meg. It was anonymous, and people didn't know it was me at first. And then right before the election, it got shut down. And my 2 other accounts got shut down. So I had my Meagan Baldini page and my backup page. All 3 got wiped at the same time. So obviously Daddy IG knew and tied me together, which is fine. It's not like I was doing some crazy VPN system at the time to bypass. I didn't think I'd get to taken down. Everything I was posting is cited and sourced. I don't play the games of manipulating statistics. I don't play the games of comparing an apple to a sheep. I thought this is the way to reach people because it's just so basic, non-emotional. And the fact that that's what really got me taken down, it was just because the information was spreading so much, right?
Well, how many followers did you have, and how interactive were they? Because that could play a major part in that censorship, because with you being a heavy influencer, then you would become danger.
And also, just for our viewers, do you mind explaining quickly just kind of what AnonBC was about, and kind of just things like that, just so they get a quick overview, just to understand what you were doing and the power of that, so they can really understand the implication of this and getting taken down.
For sure. So I'll start with AnonBC, just in terms of being a non political, unbiased, right? There's always a bias in everything, but as much as you can imagine, avenue of information, education for the public, just to understand what COVID is or isn't in our province. And that was done by taking only government sources. I have like a rule of basically 5 government resources that I allow on our slides, and anyone who volunteers with me, they know that as well. We've got quite strict rules of what we'll consider, you know, the government's truth, right? And so we were presenting this information, for example, coming out, educating people on definitions, what it truly means to be uninjected or partially injected, partially uninjected, whatever the government wants to call it. You know, talking about the average age of death, talking about the percentage of people in hospitals right now, you know, just basic stuff, educating people on how many people died last year as opposed to the year before of like overdoses and CoFlu and all these things. So that was AnonBC's platform as a whole. We were just posting these slides and people were just sending them off. And it was a ton of people who I know would never have followed Meagan Baldini, you know, the account that you just look at them and you're like, oh, they would be mad at Meagan, right? And then they were eating this information up, right? And so that's what I think was kind of, Jamie, going back to your question of, you know, the popularity of it. I had initially built my platform doing completely unrelated, like girly stuff on my page. I got up to 50,000 followers. When I started talking about COVID, I lost a ton of followers. Like I had a huge, like liberal leftist, young, you know, woman LGBTQ community following me and love them. But unfortunately, a lot of them tend to buy into a lot of the, you know, very baity type of propaganda on social media. So immediately when they hear somebody like me, they're like, you know, all of their radar is going off, like grandma killer, you know. And so I lost like 7,000 followers initially. And I stopped working with brands because I was doing a lot of brand content, and I was like, I'm not selling my soul anymore. I'm not going to work for brands who are perpetuating nonsense, right? And so when I lost all those followers, I, you know, like slowly started to gain again, and people more like-minded, you know, balance out the demographic there a little bit. So then I had a backup account that had about 8,000 followers, and then the non-account grew to 3 in a very short amount of time, and then they all got taken. So my reach, though, and this is where I think even Instagram plays with their numbers to make you think you're either more or less popular than you are, because my page wouldn't grow often, but I was hitting like 200,000 accounts every 7 days. And I had tons of people who were following me, but not who were regular viewers. You know, you start to see a trend of people and you see that they're not following you because there's also like a fear to show affiliation. And that comes with a society of cancel culture and censorship, right? Is they support you, a silent supporter, right? The secret middle that they always call it, the silent majority, right? There's people in the middle that want to support, but they're like, if my whole family sees that I follow this person on socials, like I'm going to get ostracized, right? Or I'll get ripped a new one. So it's things like that, even that, you know, it's hard to really tell what, you know, your reach is on socials. But even on the Anon account, because every new account I make for Anon does get wiped immediately, just gotta love that. Not allowed to share government data. In Telegram, we have a group, very small. We just started it after getting wiped. It's got like 100 something people in there, but you know, even those slides just in there, 1,000 views, 2,000 views. And I'm always on different apps scrolling, and then I see a slide. I'm like, oh, there's a slide. Right. So that's where it's like, we know that this is just very consumable info that kind of people go like, wow, did you know that? And they send it on to their like triple, you know, injected pal. They're like, whoa.
That's crazy. So I will definitely agree that what's really interesting is, like, even for myself on Instagram, like Facebook was censoring, jail, pulling, all that kind of stuff. Instagram, it does, but the amount of things. So for example, like my sister, I went to visit her, and she's about 5 years younger than me. And this was back in, I believe it was in the spring. And I was asking, I was like, so like, what's your feelings on this? I hadn't even told her my stance. Like she kind of knows my stance, to be honest. But yeah. I didn't really express to her anything particular. She's like, I don't want to get it. And I was just like, okay, why? She's like, I saw something on Instagram that was explaining that it really is going to harm me reproductively, and I just don't want to. I don't want that. And I was like, you saw that on Instagram? And she's like, yeah. And I've actually seen a bunch of that. And I was like, oh my God. And so since then, though, I have noticed that even in my, so like when you go through the search thing and it just kind of gives you a bunch of like suggested stuff, like out of like maybe every 10 or 15 thing is something related to this, where it's like against this type of, and it's not, I don't see pro things. I only see against stuff.
Well, that's because the algorithm knows that you.
Yes. And so it's just really interesting that even with the algorithm in itself, that it's still not trying to keep me from that. It's still not just deleting those things outright. Kind of like with Facebook, it was just like, boom, if it senses you, it's gone. For the most, there's some people who manage to get through it, but yeah, I found that even just blatant stuff is just like not being taken down per se by them. And so I was surprised, but I think it's just the amount that's there. There's so much and they can't catch it all. And so that's what makes me feel very encouraged about all this, is that even when you feel like you're alone and it's a losing battle, that's what you're meant to be. That's what you're meant to feel. You're not meant to feel like you have comrades around you constantly, that there's people around you that are all thinking the same things to one degree or another, at least beginning to question it, if not having questioned it from the beginning. And that they can try to hide this through their platforms, through these main kind of things that you'll go to for your information, but they can't hide it all. And with the amount that's out there and it's what's trying to be suggested, it really does give me more rejuvenated faith in the movement, that it is impactful, and there are far more people than what I even think there is who are on this page.
Yeah, I agree with you. Jamie, did you have something to add? Because I want to break that down a little bit, but if you have something first.
Yeah, I have something to add. It's kind of wrapping up the comment you said earlier about reaching the people that are ready, but they don't know they're fully ready yet. And this is one thing I've been talking about regularly lately. I do a lot of face-to-face meetings, so some of our groups are getting up over the 100 into the 150 mark where we're meeting. And so I'm preparing the groups that we're going to start to see police officers in the room. We're going to start to see double jab people in the room. We're going to start to see even people come into the room with a mask on. So this is where we really have to be conscious of the vocabulary we're using. We don't want to start to become the projected image that the media has presented. Oh, this is going to happen, and preachy all that way. So I'm letting everybody that's coming to these be conscious of what you're saying, because you don't know who's sitting in the crowd. And at this point, we have to be open-armed and pull everyone in a loving manner. This way, they're all welcome, because at the end of the day, this is all of our battle.
Yeah. I'm glad that you recognize that too, because I know my flaws in my approach to communicating and where I'm good and where I'm not, right? So that's why I did the Anon approach. But even for myself, obviously we make our jokes, like we ship posts here and there because we're just tired of it. But in general, it's so important that on all sides, we understand that people live in entirely different dimensions right in front of you. And they think a reality is completely different. And it's not to say that we should embolden it and tell them that they're right and live in la la land with them, but it's just knowing your audience, right? So for example, when I talk about AnonBC, even with people on our side, they'll be like, but the PCR test, Meagan, the PCR test. Why are you talking about that? It benefits you. It's the fact that these numbers are still so low. Who cares if it's as accurate as flipping a coin? We know that it's not accurate, but what we do know is, in spite of that, these numbers still are ridiculously low. So why are you sitting here shooting your own argument in the foot? These are the steps that you take to help bring awareness, help open up the third eye. And then as they get comfortable with that part of the story, then you go into the next step and you take your next 2 weeks, right? And then you take your next 2 weeks. And then you
can't rabbit hole too quickly, or else you lose them. You lose them in transition.
Exactly. And so with regards to what you were saying, on socials and how Insta behaves, I think this is something that I really want to spend a lot of, my future talking about. It's just how the AI works, how it behaves with the hive mind concept, and then how those hive minds and silos might function, how that can disrupt society heavily, right? Because right now it's yes, I agree with you. You find those things because the AI studies you. They're like, okay, Jessica likes this. We're going to show her this. The AI doesn't care about the community guidelines. They're just like, my job is to study Jessica, right? The community guidelines come in after that. So whether you get propagated by the AI for that or not is like irrelevant to the communist guidelines. So when they actually are presenting the rules and the structure, that's literally not defined, right? Insta decides based on, you know, whether someone's getting too much attention or too much engagement. And it's not even based on the, you know, because people say, oh, a few people made it through the crack. There's a reason, right? Always there's a reason for something. And so some of those bigger people, those big players are like, how do they never get taken down? And they're always out there on Twitter like, my account got taken down for 30 seconds. Oh my God, censorship. And then they conveniently just get their account back and they've got a blue check mark, right? The people that get taken down that matter are the micro influencers like us, because there's a ton more of us, right? It's always numbers game. So you have to shut down the mini groups to not let them grow, right? Because we have to grow from the bottom up. The top is not here to save us. The elites, the government, whoever the fuck's at the top, they don't care. They don't care. They're going to keep you at the bottom, right? So that's where if we can't build it up, and why can we not build it up? Because that polarity right now between what you see from your AI studying you to what, you know, Heather, who, you know, can't wait to save 4 more grandmas the second time she gets her next injection, right? Like those behaviors are going to be completely different positions, how the AI presents to you. And then the problem with that, though, is then when the whole world becomes that polarized and there's like such a divide, that being able to even come back to have a conversation, that's why we're still here, right? And that censorship was meant to pigeon right in front. So in order to have that happen, they needed to separate us so much to the extreme that our opinions are no longer discussable because they're coming from an ideological difference, right? A lot of people on the other side are so convicted in science. I believe in science. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like, you believe in testing things out and asking questions, or like, what does that mean, right? So it's really an ideological base that fuels this whole conversation. And I think Instagram knows that the crazier the story, the better it is for them. And the news knows that the government knows it. Because the second that your sister or whoever says, you know, the buzzword, I saw it in a video, and the media is like, we've done like 9 days of slander campaigns that if anybody brings up that one word, everybody in the public already thinks that they're crazy, right? So they keep that intense content for a reason, right? The more radical, the more crazy it makes us, the more likely Instagram's just like, you know what, I'm going to leave that reptilian flat earth theory about COVID coming from pangolins just there for everybody to see. But Meagan, that Meagan girl who's posting government data, that's way too efficient and effective for us right now. We're going to shut her down, right? So there's like, to that level, they're analyzing our accounts. And I know that sounds so conspiratorial, but it's like, it has to be that case because it's not apples to apples. If it was, like you said, you would see a lot of this crazy shit on Instagram removed. Like sometimes I wake up and I just laugh because I'm like, what did I just watch? And like my account got taken down. You know?
Yes, that's such a good point. I really hadn't seen it that way. That they leaving the more radical, the people, like it's usually the people with the loudest voices half the time in most movements that are kind of seen as the crazier ones, and so leaving that up versus taking down the smaller people. I never thought about that approach, and that's such a I almost want to say like a battle type kind of thing. Like it just, yeah, so interesting. I didn't think about it like that. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, when you start to pay attention, you'll see it. You'll be like, why was that, like, right? It's like the Facebook whistleblower, right? Like, oh, she's got a whole like conference, she's got a blue check mark already, she's like there with her lawyers and stuff. You're like, how did you get through to do this, right? The
Facebook plant that got on 60 Minutes.
Exactly. I'm like, a real whistleblower you never hear.
Yes,
exactly. You see, the reason why I think I haven't been censored yet, even though I'm posting stuff and people will share it and then I watch them get censored, is I'll throw in statistics, I'll throw in a couple of theories, but I'll go from both sides. Like I've put up, you know, the whole jab reports right in the beginning, which was giving their statistics, and then I would give other evidence of other people collecting, and then I'll put something about peace and love, and then something about your children, and then growing, and then resistance. And so I'm messing it up. So I don't think they can keep up, because every now and then I just throw something else in there. And so it's a lot of fun, right?
They'll get you eventually. Because honestly, like, I was so good. I honestly thought that I was not going to get shut down because I regularly was being banned on my live capabilities. So like they always were like, you know what, Meagan, just, you're not allowed to go live anymore. And I was like, what the hell? Like, it got to the point where I was like perpetually banned from doing lives. And but other than that, I was still growing. I was still getting tons of reach. And then, tons of people around me were getting taken down left, right, and center. And I was like, damn, I must have did it. I must have figured out, because I'm not posting, again, I say it with air quotes, but theories, right? Like, I kind of keep it very in the middle. Or when I am talking about a more idea premise base, I'll say that. I'll clarify, like, I don't have proof of this, or this is just my, theorizing. And so I also thought that was the case. And then, one day I woke up and it was like, but I think it was because also the election was like right there. Just like in the States, they did the same thing. So.
Yeah. So, well, let's get into our last topic. How do we keep sane in this insane world? I mean, anybody that's watching this, it can be from both sides of the fence when you actually think about it, because I think whether you're on the one side or the other, we're both driving each other crazy. I like being down the middle because it seems to be a funner position. You get to watch other people spin out on both sides, where they get super frustrated and they kind of spin out, and I'm not getting as frustrated. And then people will be like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, well, and you try to explain it to them, but they can't see it. So, and a lot of that, I believe, is from staying in the middle and looking at both sides. I know I've had some conversations, and I've been able to convince nurses, and I had a military medic in. They'll come in with their masks on, and then by the time they're leaving, their masks are off, just through the conversations that we're having. And I have said to some people that are like all buying the CoFlu, right? And I'll say to them, how is it, like, you're looking at me like I'm a conspiracy theorist, because that's a shutdown word, right? And or phrase. And I'll say, you're looking at me this way, but I'm just going to ask you one question. How is it I can see what you believe and why you're doing and acting the way you're doing, but you can't see the reason why I am believing what I believe and acting the way I'm acting? Who do you think is seeing the bigger picture? And then I'll leave them with that question. And then that's it. And usually, because they're in my chair, they're stuck. I tattoo them, right? So they can't go anywhere. So usually,
like, I don't want him to mess up. He's going to write like some dumb shit on me.
Start writing my grocery list. But no, it's basically they'll start to prod a little bit, and they'll be more inquisitive. And it's all about the approach. So but that's how I found I stay sane. What's your approach on that?
Yeah, I think the same way. I think, to be fair, the people on our side, I think it's like the same thing, analyzing everything, right? Like, everybody on our side is like, we're literally fighting for our right to access society. So a lot of us are super stressed. A lot of us are super overwhelmed, and more so, if anything, than the people on the other side, right? They've done their part. They've rolled up. They're going back to their life, and we're out here being a burden to their existence, right? So when you look at it even from that, it's like, we really do have to be the ones super paying attention to our mental health right now, because we are the ones who are going to be persecuted and pressed and tested, right? And that resilience is going to be the deal breaker. You either have it or you don't, right? And I think one thing right now is, my top recommendations to people in my life, but, I'll often get the question even on socials, will be like, how do you deal with the fact that your family thinks you're crazy? Or how do you deal with the fact that you can't do anything? Or how do you cope with not knowing what your future is going to be? And it's like, well, I always say, are you married to an outcome, right? Like, what is your expectation? Are you married to an outcome? Because that is the only way you're going to be like really let down, is you have something in mind that it can't fail. It has to be that outcome. And if that doesn't go well, then you're going to be left to be disappointed. And a lot of, I think, in general, in all parts of our life, we too quickly attached to an outcome. And I think the more you can let go and let God, or, you know, kind of be okay with what might come about, because just because it doesn't go your way doesn't mean it's not going to eventually, right? Sometimes you need those tribulations before you really get to that end result. So I think really kind of setting your expectations, you know, being patient and having those conversations with yourself, meditating, being, you know, connected to your community, and having those sit downs with people, and being curious, right? But I think the biggest thing is like having an open mind, right? Even ourselves on this side, we're so educated. I read it all. I know it all. I can, you know, cite everything, and you just don't know anything, you masker, right? I think it's even on our side, it's just always kind of, I want to have an open mind, but not so much that my brain falls out, right? And I need to be okay with whatever happens and plan accordingly, right? But don't plan for, you know, a volcano to erupt, right? You got to be reasonable. So I think it's, again, it's buying into, even on our side, like, don't be out there, you know, oh my God, we're going to have a food supply shortage tomorrow, and if you don't go get like all these things tomorrow, it's like we are going to kind of cause our own self-sabotage with some of these actions. It's not to say don't be prepared and aware that there's container issues and manufactured crisis going on, but being realistic about your reality around you, right? Sometimes we're so like this that when we put our phone down, we don't realize like COVID's not even here. Like the government's not in my backyard. And, you know, the only time I hear about this is when I open up my phone, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, getting back in touch with like grounding. So all my friends, you know, they're like, Meagan, how do you stay sane? I'm like, be okay with anything happening. Because at this point, if 2020 and 2021 hasn't shown you that literally anything can happen, then you're not paying attention.
Yes, I completely agree. I just wanted to add too. So with your AnonBC, it had been taken down before, but then we were talking a little bit before this about, you know, some things in the works with that. Is that something that you wanted to kind of to talk about a bit in terms of its potential return and what that would look like maybe, and kind of the things that what you do even in terms of besides posting and stuff like that. So is that something that you feel comfortable with talking about with us?
So what I'll share for now is that we're still doing the slides. We're still, you know, because the data comes out every week, twice a week. There's 2 reports we regularly reference, and then there's new topics that come up all the time. So we're regularly updating slides with new information. And then we're going to be doing different methods of outreach via more like traditional guerrilla style marketing, which is like print, you know, house to house, B2B, that type of thing, where the government doesn't have the power to hit one button and shut you off. So we are working on doing some more on the ground things that are a little bit more edgy, but still very, you know, different, and not just this info package that you get at a freedom rally that's got too many legalese words in it, right? It's going to kind of challenge from a different approach, sort of like the slides. So we're going to really kind of just keep continuing this method, because I think it does shake the government. It makes people want to pay attention when they see something that looks like a government document. They're like, oh, this is legitimate, right? And it's just how it's going to be presented. And I think that for AnonBC, that's our goal, because at the end of the day, every existing movement, whether it's the, you know, We're All Essential, or you know, the Liberty group, or whatever, the group suing Bonnie Henry, like every group will be benefiting off of basic information, because the more that the public is very, you know, on a baseline level educated on what COVID is or isn't in our province, then every movement around that, whether it's in the judicial system, in the school system, in your family dinner table, will go more smoothly. And you'll feel like less people are shocked when you come out, you know, with a different view than what they've been used to, right? Because now it's like more and more people are going, well, isn't it kind of weird that like the average person's dying at 84 and like we're only supposed to live till like 81 anyways? Like, how weird. Right. But before they didn't maybe know that. So that simple bit of info just adds that perspective. And so even if you believe that the CoFlu comes from an alien and, you know, Fauci's a reptile, it doesn't even matter, because you're just like, but still, COVID is still not that deadly. So wherever you live in the matrix or layer outside of it, this will benefit us. Right. So that's the approach with the AnonBC. More things will come, but the launch of the first item is going to be very strategic, and we'll just see we'll see what happens.
Well, we're excited to see about that. So in terms of people being able to get in contact with you or be able to follow anything that you have, you'd mentioned a Telegram group. Is that particularly more private right now, or is that something that other people can join if they're interested, just to kind of keep up with following you?
Yeah, so just from the restrictions of what platforms allow me to exist with other people, Twitter and Telegram. So myself personally, I have Twitter and Telegram. So my Twitter is Meagan Baldini, and my Telegram is Meags again, same as my Instagram. When it comes to Anon, they won't let me post on Instagram or Facebook. So we only have the Telegram and Twitter. So what we do is we post our slides and anything useful to the Anon group on Telegram and on Twitter. And then people just take that and disseminate it everywhere else. Because just like with the whole Area 51 meme, you can't shut down everybody unless you shut off the internet.
Perfect. And yeah, like the thing below says, we have all the links for everything in the description here. So if you're looking to follow Meagan, we have that below for people to click on. So that's fantastic. I'm really glad that they weren't able to get all of what you got, and you still have lots to be able to put out there, because yeah, exactly what you said. As soon as it's to one, and then from there to many, and then out. So yeah, they can't get us all.
Exactly. And we just have to remember, you gotta plant the seed. You gotta keep watering in our community, in ourself, in our body. Everything is like, they look at the trees. They look like our lungs. Look at the roots. They look like how, everything is connected. And if you have to water the trees, you have to water yourself, you have to water your information, you have to water your education. You have to just keep going back and getting it to grow. It's not just going to grow on its own, right? Unless, shit happens. But for the most part, in human beings, that's not just going to happen on its own.
I really like that. That's a good way of explaining it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, that was great to have you on the show, Meagan. Thank you for coming out. Thanks for sharing all this info with us. We look forward to seeing your updated data. And that's kind of an easy source, eh? The government just keeps throwing it out there so you can keep shooting them in the foot. So
literally. The best part is every new week, they'll if I call out something a week before, that's how crazy it is. Like the next report, they'll mess with that page. And I'm like, oh, Bonnie.
That's good. We need more people doing the things that like you're doing, and making the public aware with some of the most simplest data and facts. And we don't need to kill them with an overload. In the beginning of all this, I would dump on people, and I realized how shocking that was for some individuals. So I learned how to ease back, neutralize my conversation. This way it was more receptive. So that's definitely the way to go, planting those seeds, getting right into that.
Checking the weather app is stressful for some people. Just think about that.
Yeah, no doubt. So I mean, I've curved my conversation, not necessarily all about the CoFlu anymore, and try and get into some everyday talking and look at it more like a sales pitch, right? If you go right for the sale, then you're not going to get the individual. Where you start talking to them, relating to them, and then you can pull them into a conversation, and then start killing them with a little bit of data. And I look for key points on how they're reacting. When you start to get the overload, they go glossy-eyed, right? And the other ones is they'll look up, and if they start pondering, and you leave them alone with it, right? And then you just kind of move on. So it's kind of, as you were saying earlier, knowing your audience and making sure you're working with them. So and we're all dealing with the censorship in one way or another. So that's a tough one as well. I was just actually at one meeting, and there's one fella, he swears a little more than others. And so somebody asked him to mind his P's and Q's, and because there's more Christians in the room. And so it's upsetting, because it's like we're trying to get over censorship, and then we're coming together, and then it's like, when is appropriate to censor each other or not? You know what I mean? So it's becoming this really, I guess it's like an agitated state where, when somebody's just trying to do it politely, hey, just be kind of considerate, and people are, being censored so much, they become very sensitive to it.
Yeah. Well, it's like the semantics of it, right? It's like a lot of it is just, you know, when you're fighting with your spouse and it just becomes like an argument over semantics of who can like argue better in that way. And you're like, you're not even on the point anymore. You're both just like over here juggling who can, you know, pigeon the other one, right? And it's like, you don't even know why you're even talking anymore. So I think that happens too. And it's always just like, know your audience and know when to stop. Like sometimes it's just okay to be like, this is like, well, I'm going to go over here, right? That's okay too. But vice versa. Sometimes I'm sure it's like talking to drywall when you talk to me.
And then for the keeping sane part, I've been mentioning this periodically. You know, some of the best ways to keep sane is get a good night's sleep, drink more water, eat healthier food, right? Start to get exercise. If you're not in the position to get exercise, like go for walks, you know, start to do things, turn your TV off, turn your devices off, spend a little more time with one of your loved ones, talk, read a book, just do anything other than tapping into everything and start to look at healthy alternatives, because that helps you really, really, you know, cope with any of the stress that you're under. So
exactly. Yeah. And just like, you know, sitting down like this and reconnecting with sanity is super important, right? Because I'm sure you guys all have your group that you go back to and you're like, thank God, like you're here. Because, you know, we also have our different groups outside of that where, you know, you have to show up and wear half a mask, right? And present yourself in some type of way. So, you know, it's still like knowing your audience, but then trying to connect again, even with those people that you can't quite connect with. Find a reason, find a way, right? And that's going to be the deal breaker on humanity or not, whether you have the patience to find a way to connect with your neighbor when in every form you typically can't. Like, and that's supposed to be the Canadian way, right? We're supposed to be a melting pot, according to the government propaganda, of people who can come together and put our differences aside and coexist, right? So getting back to those fundamentals and kind of reaching people like that. And then everything around that, like the COVID agenda or any other agenda, just kind of sits on top of that. And they go, why is the government so whack, right? So when you focus here below the government, it's not politics. It's literally just being a good person, right?
And that's why I also focus in on a lot of face-to-face. So I'm in several different face-to-face, not necessarily a rally. You know, the rallies are good to go to as an energy burst, but when you're in a face-to-face meeting, you're talking about practical things within your community. You're connecting with like-minded individuals. You're talking about things that you can do for each other, with each other, you know, and then, you know, if you get into the topics of when shit hits the fan, what you can do and that kind of thing. And that's very important as well, because then you don't feel like you're an island. Right. You're out there all by yourself. You start to realize that you have people right in your own backyard, and then you can connect with, and if you have a rough day, you can call them and that kind of thing. So this is a one thing that all of this CoFlu has done for us is really starting to push us to get back together and go back to the core basics of our human instincts, where we are a herding animal that really needs to be social, and we need that love and hugging each other and being in the presence and looking somebody dead in the eye, you know, in the physical form, as opposed to all these Zooms and everything else. So that's a really good way as well. So I promote that too.
Yeah. And on that note, honestly, like just when you really think about that instinct and you study it from the science, right? We have an energy frequency that we tap into, that we're a part of. We are one with that frequency in that system, right? And where you lie on that frequency is dependent on so many variables, right? So I think for us, like, or for myself, the way that I think about it is, if you are aware, sentient, a higher conscious human being, and you understand how energy works and the degrees of separation with people, that is so empowering to know. Like, one individual with a little bit of energy can really impact so many people, just literally not even ever meeting them, just by the energy in their existence, right? So you can be alone in a condo building and your energy impact the entire building. And that's scary, but it's also so empowering if you really believe in like the goodness and how to manifest that and add that into that energy frequency, to be like, how can I impact the 70,000 reach that I have through my energy field when I'm tapping in, right? And you know, and being more spiritually aware to those things. It's okay to kind of talk about spirituality and be like, you know what, I believe in a higher power. It's like, it's not about like, oh, you believe a guy in a cloud. It's like, no, I believe in like our energy. We're all connected, and we need to come together and remember what it means to be, you know, human and have that family. We're all, you know, under a microscope, we're all the same thing. So tap into that.
Exactly. I promote that too. I talk about there's a Japanese scientist that did the water study and froze the water with the crystal. And so the one water is love, the other one is hate. And so I remind people, be kind to yourself. You're 90% water. So if you're looking at how the water reacts just to an emotional state, well, that water's in you. So if you're in a negative emotional state all the time, you got icky water.
Exactly.
Be happy water.
Exactly. And think about it again. You got that tiny little seed, right? You got to water that tiny little seed. How much water you got to keep like pouring on that seed? You got to keep going back. And you're like, how much does this seed drink, right? So it's the same thing in that regard of like going back and, you know, giving the love and the nutrition through the water. Plant the seeds, but water them.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, I love that note to leave it on. Just kind of maintain positivity, keeping things. Try to not let all of this kind of get you down. Find a way to unplug and being around people that you can enjoy their company, not just talk about this type of thing. Like broaden your horizons in terms of that kind of stuff. So, So on that note, we'll wrap it up. Like I said, we're stoked to see kind of where this goes. Maybe we can have you on in the future and talk a little bit more about things once it launches. And yeah, this was fantastic. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me, you guys. I'm excited. I hope to see your platform grow, and you know, I love that you guys just want to have good conversations with people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Like we're all essential. We're very focused on helping businesses and making sure that people feel empowered and have solutions to apply to their life, and really having the support system needed to move forward and feel confident in that moving forward. So yes, and having guests on like you just makes it that much better with just again buttressing ourselves with more information and statistics and ways to innovative ways to try to bring more people to our side. So again, fantastic, great conversation.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we got this.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on. And anyone that's out there that has a business or you want to volunteer, we are allessential.ca. You can register as a business. You don't have to go public right away. It is all how you're feeling. Get into the Telegram chats. We have tons of people in there giving great information, empowering us to get open, stay open, how to do it, and some of the downfalls you might come across, some of the positive things you might come across. Also, volunteers, more shoulders to carry this weight, the better. So we need all of you. We're all in this together. We are actually all in this together. They're not.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to come together and really fight. So on that note, thank you for staying for the conversation, and hope you left empowered. Have a great night.
Bye, guys. Thanks.